I do want to give the scenario where you have this writer, this novelist, who's been gaining a lot of popularity, who's been seen as this rising star, and all of a sudden, he disappears, he stops writing. Hello everyone! From dramas to webtoons to novels, explore Korea's story with us. This is Who Reads Story. My name is An Sung-jin and I'm a news reporter. And today we have a new guest with us.
Hi, I'm Jack Greenberg. I'm a freelance writer and researcher based in Seoul. Thanks for having me. I cover a lot of Korean history and the politics of memory in my work, but in my spare time, I enjoy Korean literature. So glad to be here today for this discussion.
Right, I feel like you might be the right person to shine today with our topic. And today we're going to be talking about director Lee Chang-dong's short story titled Snowy Day. And before we talk and before we delve in a bit deep, I do want to give the scenario where you have this writer, this novelist, who's been gaining a lot of popularity, who's been seen as this rising star, and all of a sudden, he disappears, he stops writing. Later on, after a few years, he shows up as this new rising star in the film industry. Now, this is director Lee Chang-dong, who we are going to be talking about today.
Yeah, he certainly has had an unusual career, and it's cinematic in its art in a way. He was South Korea's Minister of Culture under President Roh Moo-hyun from 2003 to 2004. So this is another layer to his personality. He's not only an artist who observes society and reflects it in his work, but for a brief period, he was actually shaping society's cultural direction.
Now, the piece that we're going to be talking about today is Snowy Day and Other Stories, which was published in 1987, and there are other stories, including this one. 7 whole other stories are included within this book.
Yeah, so Snowy Day, it takes place on a Korean military base, and it's at the beginning of winter, and it's all about this young university-educated private. You know, he doesn't want to be in the military, but he ends up there by force.
Right.
And he's navigating this very tense relationship with his superior, Corporal Choi. And, you know, when you first look at the first couple pages, you think, oh, maybe this is an innocent romance about meeting one's first love. It's on the first snow of the season, but really it's a meditation on pride, on dignity, about how do you preserve your individuality, and also about when do you have to submit in this rigid hierarchy.
Right, for me it was interesting how the story itself kind of went back and forth from the perspective of the young lady back to the perspective of the private. And in the beginning, as you mentioned, the interaction of the two completely seemed, you know, innocent before they delve in and the story progresses. I remember reading the story with a slight tense because I can imagine what the military would have been like back then. But, you know, as for someone who isn't perhaps familiar with what the Korean military is like or what the hierarchy is like, what was it like for you while you were reading the story?
You know, where I'm from, we don't have conscription, so maybe fortunately I haven't served in the military, but I think you can still be captivated by this story. Despite its minimalism in places, it reminds you that there are these other systems in our society where you may not have power, but you're forced to, you know, deal with a hierarchy, whether it's in school, the workplace, and politics. So this story is one that quietly asks, how does a person preserve some kind of self-respect in a situation where they, on one hand, feel alienated, but they also don't necessarily have the power to change what's happening around them.
Right, I guess as you mentioned, even if conscription itself isn't, you know, applicable for you or for any of our viewers who are watching right now, the fact that, you know, there is a society or the system of hierarchy still applies to everywhere, even if it's not within the military itself. And for you, you are a writer before a reader yourself, so I'm sure this book may have been touching in some way for you as well. And apart from his novels, he is also renowned movie director, and he starts off his movie career in 1997 with the movie Greenfish. And the reason why this is interesting is because in a previous interview, he said that, you know, as I turn 40, I try to boost myself mentally and physically. And, you know, that's a reason why he started making these movies. I would like to recommend the movie Peppermint Candy. It's been released in 1999 and it was ranked as one of the best movies within that year domestically, but it's also been invited to the Cannes Film Festival for the Director's Fortnight, and I guess that's how director Lee Chang-dong kind of ended up becoming this more renowned film director worldwide.
You know, it's a film that I only watched a few weeks ago, but it's so powerful. It's not only about the personal trauma of the protagonist, but it's a film that reflects these major moments in modern and contemporary Korean history. And I think he's almost conducting this sort of moral autopsy on these events and how do those shape the protagonist's life. You know, he's in the military when the Gwangju uprising is happening. Then he becomes a police officer who is, you know, engaging or torturing suspects. You know, that becomes an exciting trauma. Later, he's a businessman when the IMF crisis is unfolding. So the protagonist, his life, it's reflecting social upheaval and how does social upheaval devastate one's own self? How do they try to maintain innocence but somehow lose that as well?
Right, I feel like because he was in the scenes back then, he does a good job embedding the societal values or what the historical background was like back then into his novels or into his movies. And for most of the characters that he portrays within, whether it be his movie or his novels, I think he does a good job trying to portray the history of all these characters. And he does it through a very intimate and painful way, whether it be as seen in Snowy Day or through Peppermint Candy.
Yeah, it doesn't feel forced, which is something that really stands out in comparisons to some other writers. But you know, one thing that also struck me between Peppermint Candy and Snowy Day is they kind of mirror each other, or one mirrors the other. You know, they both include these scenes where a woman is trying to visit her man at a military base, only to be blocked for one reason or another from seeing him. It kind of reflects the era where, you know, personal relationships are disrupted by martial law, by institutional control. Something as simple as a visit between two lovers, it becomes impossible because of these broader power structures.
Right, again, I guess that reflects what the society was like then, whether it be through hierarchy. And I guess what's interesting is that the story itself is kind of based off of director Lee Chang-dong's personal experience of how he actually went through all this of, you know, while he was on guard duty, he met this young lady, and that entire conversation has been memoed, noted, and then developed into a story. And I guess, you know, how that further develops on is within the story of Snowy Day. So, you know, for our viewers that haven't seen any of his films or novels yet, give it a read. And that is all we have for today's Who Reads Story. Thank you again, Jack, for being here with us. And for our viewers, don't forget to leave a like and a comment and subscribe to our channel. This is all we have for Who Reads Story, and I will be back next week with a new episode on Korean content. Thank you for being with us. Bye!